Welcome back, everybody, to your daily update on the status of the Malazan Empire. And it's Monday, so we're back with Memories of Ice, Book 2, Hearthstone. Hearthstone. Saying this with a lisp sucks incredibly. Anyway, and I figured I'll do something of a schedule kind of thing because sometimes I want to rant about something less Malazani kind of thing. And did you hear what he did there? It was terrible, right? Anyway, I want to talk about something that is not just like book read through kind of ramblings. So I figured what I'll do is I'll do Malazan Book of the Fallen daily updates from Monday until Friday, maybe Saturday. I'll figure that one out when I'm there, which will be this Saturday, I expect. And Sundays, I'll just rant about something fantasy books. It might be another one of those ye old fantasy where I go back and look at one of those classics or unsung classics of the fantasy genre that I feel can really give a lot like to like give you a large insight into how contemporary fantasy literature has evolved. It might be single, I don't want to call them reviews, but single videos on books that I really like and feel more people should read. And unfortunately, no one does and no one talks about them. So I'll just, yell at you until you do that. It might be something on mythology or on religion or whatever within the fantasy genre or within Malazan, or like probably a lot of it will be within Malazan because it offers so many opportunities to show these things. But it'll be something more abstract and less focused on the straight up read through. If you have like any wishes what I should talk about, then just yell at me in the comments or whatever, send me a message. I don't know. You probably can't reach me aside from writing it in the comments at the moment. I'll figure that one out as well. So yeah, we'll do that. That's sort of the plan. So we've got a lot of memories of ice to go through within the next couple of days. I suspect we won't be done by the end of the week. We'll see how fast I'll get through all of this. Also, the cape. You remember I started showing you this. We are getting, well, along is what I'm trying to say. So I've made some progress. I think it still doesn't look like much, I suspect, but it's almost as broad as that scarf at this point. And it's rather long, rather broad is what I was meaning, and rather long already. So, like, I can put this around my neck already, and it, goes down to my shoulders, over my shoulders already. This is obviously not how this will look in the end. I still have to figure out how to do, the cowl and everything. But for like 3 days of knitting, I'm not completely unpleased, is what I'm trying to say here. So we'll see how large it will be by tomorrow. And then, yes, we'll figure out how that goes. So now let's go to Hearthstone. That wasn't good, right? Hearthstone. Oh, fuck it. Anyway, cheers. All right. Now, book 2 of Memories of Ice is a very, very interesting part. As far as, I've not yet finished it by half. I'm somewhere in chapter 9 at the moment, I think. 8 or 9, one of those. And but the first one is super long. It's, I don't know. What I'm trying to say here is it's one of those parts at the beginning of book 2 where we see how incredibly good Steven Erikson is when it comes to foreshadowing or making even the smallest detail count, or at least pay off if you realize these kind of things. We get a lot of more backstory to the Empire that, if we follow that premise I just said, that, yeah, almost everything is important, will probably become really important later on. I'll try to, not spoiler anything here. And yeah, that's sort of the main takeaway from this right now, apart from many other things. Now, what do I mean when I say incredibly, like that a lot of stuff is like set up that then becomes like manages to give you this like feeling of the entire world being so vibrant and the whole thing being so deep. For example, we have the situation where Tuck the Younger is sitting there at the fire with, well, the Segula who are ignoring him, and he is looking at, he's talking to the wolf, to Baljak. And then he gets that vision of Baljak's life, and we realize one, Baljak is that wolf pup from the prologue, from the first prologue. You know, the one where we have, or is it the second one? I always confuse them. I mean the one with the Talan Imas at this point. So we have that one. And you remember from that part where they come to that scene where the Ranak, those like big antelope kind of things. I always like think of them as like something like gnus, but in much larger. The like a crossing between a gnu, do you say like that kind of antelope and an aurochs is sort of what I imagine there. These kind of huge animals. Anyway, we had that situation where they were trapped in that mud pit, tar pit. It's not a tar pit, but you know what I mean. The deep mud, and the wolves, the eye, that were also trapped in that, and then Prankol and his clan leader, like not clan leader, but you know what I mean. They talk about that, and Prankol notices that there's the paw prints of a younger wolf, younger eye, who circled that pit and then left. Apparently. Well, now we figure out that is Baljak because we see the same situation. We see that vision through, like, Tok gets that vision of Baljak circling her, the rest of her, her. Yeah. Of her circling that pit and seeing her pack dying in there. Cool, isn't it? Then like it's not exactly important, or is it? But it's like those how those things connect. And then the next one, this is the interesting part, is then the next vision is of that elder god touching Baljak on the head and talking to her. And we remember that from Karul's perspective in the other prologue when he sees that wolf and talks to it. So that's also Baljak. And then he apparently Karul has need for her and lets her sleep and gives her that weird warren where she can like run, stuff like that, until she picks up apparently also Tok for whatever reason. And to have that, basically to have suddenly that wolf, I mean, we knew it was kind of important, but to have that basically be the one viewpoint character who has been at all the like different set pieces or scenes of this of the book so far is just like, it's brilliantly done. And on the other hand, if you kind of didn't notice that or forgot about it because there's so much other stuff happening, it doesn't at this point ruin your enjoyment of the novel, is what at least I think it doesn't. You just like see, you can just see, like, ignore the two prologues and just see those scenes that that Baljak shows to Tok, and it's still a very powerful scene. You still get something out of it. So that's what I mean. Like, it's dense in a way because everything is connected, but a lot of those connections, while deepening your enjoyment, if you don't make them, they are not exactly taking enjoyment away from the novel, which is one of those things where I think that the rereading of the Malazan Book of the Fallen is so enjoyable and so actually, yeah, such a different experience from reading it the first time, but nevertheless at least as valuable an experience than as is reading it for the first time. So we have that. Now we come to other things that are very, very interesting, because we come to connections. I said before, and you're probably aware of that at this point, the that Memories of Ice takes place at the same time as does Deadhouse Gates. So we have those cross references, basically, of events happening in the Malazan Empire, and like in Seven Cities, with the characters there, and with our friend, or our viewpoint characters here on Genebakis in Memories of Ice. And we see that once again in a flashback, which does so much, which is when Tuck the Younger then has that second vision, when we see the dying, or not dying, we don't know yet, of Treach or Trake, that tiger soul taken. And that once again is one of those interesting things, because we get a lot of information now that we, or the other halves of information, pieces of information, or half solved puzzles from the other book. So you can basically fit those pieces of information together to get more out of the world building. What do I mean? We have those like reflections of the slightly awakening awakening Treach, and we realize he's a soul taken. He's a very powerful soul taken. He has a one enemy soul taken and divers, so we realize he can beat both. That one is Rylandaris, or Rylandaris, or whatever you want to pronounce him. And we've met Rylandaris, haven't we? Yes, we do. It's that divers of wolves that fights with Apt, and does not fight with Ikarian, but that shows up several times in the fights with Apt in Deadhouse Gates, when he tries to attack, when Rylandaris tries to attack, what's his name, Kalam. So that once again is like one of those things. And then, because it gets even better, then we also read him, Treach, remembering the end of the first Empire of Men, of the Soul Taken ritual that those people apparently tried to do. What's the actual word for, what do you do with rituals? You hold a ritual. You I don't want to. Anyway, doesn't matter. So we have that ritual gone awry and everything and so forth. And we remember that we saw that, or saw the other half of that, with Felicin and Culp and Heboric, when they enter that city in under the glass in the desert. You remember, with that soul taking ritual where the Chalan Imas showed up and killed everybody and so forth. So yeah, now we see that that's exactly what happened, because we are in the mind of one of those people who survived that ritual gone awry. So yeah, we have that there, which is cool, but it doesn't stop there, because there's these small nuggets in there that can be easily overlooked, and it doesn't actually really help you much. But do you remember that point where in Deadhouse Gates, where Heboric philosophizes about Otaterol and how it is made, and he's like, it's like compressed, something burned here, it's like a compressed layer of fat, and I wonder what big magical thing went wrong that created all this Otaterol? Well, apparently it was partly that ritual, because that's something that Treach then also says, like, we burned up all the magical energy, and it was cauterized with this dust that sucks up all the magic power, which is Otaterol, and it covered an entire island because we tore this warren apart and everything. So yeah, do we need to know that kind of thing? Of course we don't. But if we're really focused on world building and lore and stuff like that, then it's really cool to have those bits show up. And we see exactly that kind of thing going on there. So yeah, those were just like in that rather short scene in a way. We got a lot out of that, of just within that one like segment of the within that segment of that one chapter, we get so much of these like connections to other bits of the story that, while not vital for the plot at this point, definitely enrich the experience of reading it, is what I'm trying to say there. Now, does it explain anything at this point? Probably not, but it's nice to know all those things and wonder about them and so forth. And it also gives that feeling, I guess, of those two books actually happening at the same time. We also get an explanation why Treach Drake is not following the path of hands, but which all the other soul taking are apparently following. We don't get an answer why Kilava isn't doing it, but maybe Kilava is just very, very, very smart. Or just very stubborn. It's like, everyone is doing this, fuck it, I'm doing the opposite, I'm going here. Anyway, but Treach seems to have gone so far into his animal, into his tiger shape, that he has lost all his identity as a soul taken up to the point when he is dying, and maybe actually Talk being there, his presence, his soul, his awareness being in the tiger at that point kind of actually awakens Treach. We'll see if that has any consequences later on. But before that, he kind of wasn't aware that he was a soul taken, so that's probably why he didn't try to go on the path of hands and do whatever everyone was trying there, like find that gate in that monastery. Anyway, that was just like one of those things which when you actually read it for the second time and or made extensive notes or whatever, you suddenly realize how all these small bits that are dropped your way and easily ignored suddenly connect to this larger image of the world being actually, what's the word, the world being actually very like vibrant, dense, and like you could basically zoom in and everything seems to be connected, which gives a feeling of, I don't want to say realism, maybe verisimilitude is the word that we're looking for here, but that kind of thing there. All right, so cool world building. What else? A general sense of awakening. Now, the book is called Memories of Ice, and there's actually in that part is the line of where the title comes from. It's like one of those things where, with a lot of those books, you're like reading them and you're like, why is it called that? Or where does it show up? There's books where that is super obvious, and there's books where that is kind of difficult to say. With Gardens of the Moon, apart from any other meaning you want to put in there, there's this just small discussion with Apsala and Crocus, where Apsala tells her like fisher folk, coast dweller mythology about those gardens on the moon, which are gardens under the like undersea gardens, because the moon is basically an ocean. And she talks about the gardens of the moon in that small segment there. And I'm sure there's more meaning to it that I can't actually dig out right now because it's already like, I don't know, 2 books ago. And here we have that situation where Tool talks about memories stirring within him, and he's calling them memories of ice. Now, why is that important? The overall sense at this point is of a lot of history showing up again, a lot of history stirring. As you might say, if ice thaws after a large, a glacier thaws, and then things that are buried within the ice kind of come back, probably not alive, but they are suddenly lying there on the ground and are visible for everyone, because ice is also something that can cover a lot. And that really like goes parallel to the thing that we saw with in the opening, like in book one, when Quickban is teleported into Burn and sees one of those creatures melting because of the fever. Like Burn, we know at this point, like Burn, or the world is on this weird metaphysical level is fevered because the crippled god has infected her with fever, like has infected her, and the fever is obviously her way to fight that. And fever means that things are heating up, and they're heating up nicely, aren't they? But and that means that stuff is melting, and through that melting, things come back to the front or come forward or become visible again. And that's something that sort of hangs over this entire part of the book, at least. It kind of shows in that dialogue between Lady Envy and Cruel. Cruel. It's, I don't know how to say it. Cruel. I'll call it Cruel, and I will not wonder about that other character that's almost named the same way in a later book. Anyway, where he remonstrates with her for not showing up to the last chaining of the crippled god. And she then finally realized that that had consequences. And one of those consequences was maybe that Hood took away Dassem Ultor's daughter. And we have met Dassem Ultor's daughter. I mean, met is too much, but she shows up at the end of Deadhouse Gates, right? When Fiddler and Crocus and so forth enter the Deadhouse, and we figure out that she's lying in, not they're entering Tremolo, but they're entering the Azath, and they find her lying in the Azath somewhere, which apparently freezes time, as we have figured out at this point. Or not freezes time, but time doesn't exist the way it does outside the Azath, is what I'm trying to say. So yeah. And she realized that that had consequences, because the taking of Dassem's daughter then apparently or maybe led to the rift between Dassem Ultor and Hood. And while those are still events that we as readers, at least when we read it the first time round and have not read stuff like The Path to Ascendancy, know very little about. Because we just hear about Dassem Ultor being the first sword of the Empire and so forth. And he calling his like soldiers his first sword, but there's terminology is kind of wonky there. And at some point we probably need to look at what's the difference between the first sword of the Malazan Empire, Dassem Ultor, and the first sword of the Talani Mass, which is Onos Tulan / Tool. And are there differences and are there parallels in their characters and their character arcs? What does that actually mean? But that's not something for today, because so far we don't know much about Dassem Ultor. We just know that he was a servant of Hood, and then something happened, and Dassem got really pissed at Hood and left Hood's service, which is not easily done. I think we can see that already. Anyway, and at some point Lady Envy realized that her selfishness had maybe had those dire consequences, and those dire consequences are that now Dassem Ultor is missing and is not part of the forces of the Malazan Empire, for example, which is now mass marching against the Panion Seer. And suddenly we see that idea that small actions, or whatever kind of seemingly inconsequential actions, have a lot of consequences within this world. We see it here on the very personal level with Lady Envy, and we also get more like world building in that scene, but that's not what I wanted to get at this point. What we actually see here is like all the past is very, very much alive here and coming back to bite certain people on the ass at this point, all over the world, basically. And while sorry, I lost my track of thought. Anyway, so yeah, the past is coming back to haunt people here, which once been like fits in with that theme of ice melting and stuff coming back to light, and those memories showing back up. We also see that in Tool, in that situation when he talks to his sister, and he's just like, after she left, and he's like really struggling with his emotions, and you have suddenly that, whoa, Talana Mass have emotions. How did that happen for all of a sudden? What's going on there? How's that possible? How did those emotions freeze up? Not freeze up, but like freeze out is what I'm trying to is the word I'm using here, or should use here. So yeah, we have that. All right. What else might be important? Because yeah, we get, more badassery from everyone's favorite necromancers, Corbel Broach and Beauchelane, which is cool. They're super scary, they're super evil, and they kind of show you how far humans can go when they leave all morality behind, in a way. Which is interesting. Also, there's some weird comic relief there, obviously, with their servant emancipatrice and stuff like that. But we get some of that. We get more undead sword wielding dinosaur action, because why not? It's like, why don't more books have sword wielding undead dinosaurs? What's wrong with the world there? And yeah. I have not spoken of the Grey Swords yet, which I probably should. The question is, can I go into too much detail on that yet or not? I suspect we should actually talk about one thing there. That's the whole scene with the Herald of Hood, then and the Herald of Hood Gethol, then taking on the being dismissed by Hood and and taking service with the crippled god. We're gonna see something going on there that I'll talk about later on when more of it has happened, or when we see in which direction this develops. But yeah, it happens in the part that I'm currently talking about. I'll probably wind back to it in my terrible, rambly, disorganized way. But here it shows we have more of this war and travel stuff. Suddenly, the Grey Swords, who are in service and are an honorable mercenary company, but also a religious order. At some point, it says like a temple on the march, basically, with their own high priest and all the hierarchy. And one thing we see here is how powerful religion can be if people actually take it seriously, because that's what the Great Swords do. And they're sworn to Fëanor. And once again, we have like consequences from one book showing up in another, because Hood, like Gethol as Hood's emissary, Hood's herald, tells them that their protection from Fëanor might be near its end, because Fëanor is at the absolute end of his realm. We know what happened in Deadhouse Gates when Boric dragged his god Fëanor into the mortal realm. So that happened there on the one hand, and Hood tries to then take over the Grey Swords. Hood in general is a very, very interesting character, and he'll show up much more in later books. I guess to say that is not too much of a spoiler. We'll have an eye on him, because he's an interesting character on a lot of levels. So far, he doesn't have the best of reputations, I would say, or the best image. He comes across as rather opportunistic here, trying to hey, there's these amazing mercenaries, their god's about to get fucked, I could step in and take them over. Unfortunately, he sends a rather arrogant Jaghat. Can I just say how much I love Jaghat? I really love Jaghat. Their sense of humor is brilliant. Anyway, they're cool. All right, my neighbors are making a lot of terrible music. I hope you can't hear that. It's interesting drumming going on, is what I'm trying to say here. Yes, we also see in that scene like we learn a lot about Jaghad there because Gethel is behaving very Jaghad. He's behaving arrogantly. He is behaving slightly antisocial, and we've heard all about that, all those things about Jaghad before. But we haven't, seen too many Jaghad yet. We have seen the undead one, Raced, who turns out to be actually real fun to hang out with once he's chained inside the House of the Azath. And now we have Gethel, who is the brother of Gothos, who wrote that folly, or is still writing that folly. It's one of those things I don't know about. And we have him now, who's trying to, who is he's not a tyrant yet, but he seems to be rather focused on self-preservation, but still unable to actually fulfill the role of a herald, which, requires skills in diplomacy and stuff like that. And he gets kicked out for his impatience, arrogance, and so forth there. And the crippled god then takes him on, and Gethel actually takes that job. So we see that the crippled god, after getting his cards made by Munok in the first book, now is starting to assemble his house of power, the House of Chains. And he now has found a herald of chains, apparently. So what that all means, and also stuff like general grace sorting, what that kind of stuff can teach us about views on military equality and so forth. I guess I'll talk about all that stuff tomorrow, because there's just so much in these early chapters. In the first part of Memories of Ice, there's so much going on there. Anyway, I hope you took something away from this, and I'll talk to you tomorrow with more Cape thing going on. We're talking about, I'm not gonna say Capustan here, right? No, I'm not. I totally didn't. Please ignore that. Until then, cheers.